Yet here he was. He opened his mouth almost against his own will. I didn't mean... But before he could finish, she lifted a finger and placed it gently against the edge of the armor, silencing him without words. Her gaze held his, sharp but unbroken. The message was clear. No apology, no explanation. Only silence. The mechanic swallowed the words. His throat burned with everything left unsaid, but he obeyed. Silence. Always silence. For a long moment they stayed like that, the human with his hands resting on her armor, the alien leaning close, her eyes locked onto his. Neither spoke. Neither moved. But in that silence something was exchanged. Not through words, but through the weight of presence, the rhythm of breath, the simple act of not looking away. It was a confession without speech. She trusted him with her scar. He accepted it without question. The workshop seemed to fade around them. The hum of machines, the flicker of lights, even the smell of smoke. All of it vanished under the gravity of that unspoken bond. Finally, she leaned back, but not far. Just enough to let him breathe. Her gaze softened for a heartbeat, so brief he almost doubted it, but he caught it. He knew he had. And then, as the silence stretched once more, she whispered, not with words, but with the look in her eyes. The message was clear. You saw what no one else has. And now, you carry it with you. The mechanic lowered his head, unsure if he was ready for the weight. But deep down he understood. He had been pulled into something larger than himself, larger than armor, larger than orders. And it all began with silence. The unspoken bond. The human tightened the final bolt on the chest plate. The hiss of metal. Cooling was the only sound in the room, but it felt louder than his own heartbeat. The repair was complete. The task should have been over. He should have stepped back, reported his work, and left the workshop. But he didn't move. Neither did she. The alien warrior stood close, her armor sealed once more. Yet the memory of what he had seen beneath it, the scar, the whisper, the silence, still burned in the air between them. His hands rested on the surface of her chest plate longer than they should have, as if he could still feel the faint glow beneath. Slowly, he pulled his hands back. But before he could step away, her own hand rose. Clawed fingers hovered above. His arm then rested lightly on his sleeve. Not heavy, not threatening, just there. The mechanic froze. Her touch was steady, calm, deliberate. He dared to lift his eyes, meeting hers once more. And for the first time, her gaze did not feel like a weapon. It felt like a question. The silence between them stretched, filled with meaning neither could put into words. She had trusted him with her scar, her secret, and now with the armor repaired, she was trusting him again, with something far more dangerous. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to ask why him, to ask what this moment meant. But no sound came. He knew if he broke the silence, the fragile thread between them might snap. So he stayed quiet. Her eyes searched his face, sharp and unblinking. Yet behind that steel, he caught the flicker again, the shadow of something softer, something almost human. She leaned closer, their faces near. Once more, he could see the faint glow in her pupils, the slow rise and fall of her chest. The mechanic's heart pounded. This was not war. This was not duty. This was something neither of them had expected. Her hand tightened slightly on his arm, her claws brushing against the fabric of his sleeve. Not cutting, not hurting, just holding. For a moment, the world outside did not exist. No battles, no orders, no scars. Only the silent bond forming between two beings who should have been strangers. Finally, she pulled her hand back, slow and deliberate. Her gaze lingered on him for a heartbeat longer before she stepped back just enough to create space. But the bond did not break. He felt it, like a thread pulled taut between them, invisible yet unshakable. The mechanic exhaled, his breath trembling. He had finished the repair, but he knew this was not the end. The scar, the whisper, the touch, these were not accidents. They were steps into something larger, something dangerous, something he could not escape. The warrior's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, then hardened again as if nothing had happened. She gave a small nod, silent approval of his work. To anyone else it would have looked like the end of an assignment, a soldier dismissing her mechanic. But to him it was clear, this was not dismissal. This was invitation. An unspoken bond had been formed, and whatever came next he knew. It would change everything. The final look. The workshop was quiet again, but the silence was no longer empty. It carried weight, heavy with everything that had passed between them. The mechanic stood still, his tools scattered across the table, the smell of burned metal lingering in the air. The armor was whole now, smooth and unbroken. But the moment was not finished. He thought she would leave. Warriors like her didn't linger. They didn't waste time with humans. The job was done. And yet, she stayed. Her eyes fixed on him, sharp and steady. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. There was something in her gaze that held him, something that made his breath shallow and his chest tighten. Slowly, the warrior lifted her hand. Her fingers brushed against the edge of her chest plate, right over the place where the scar lay hidden. Then, deliberately, she pressed her palm flat against it. For a long moment she kept it there, her eyes never leaving his. The human understood. The gesture. She was reminding him. He had seen. He had touched. And now he carried her secret. His hands curled at his sides. He didn't know if it was fear or something else that gripped him, but he knew the truth. This bond was dangerous. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was something else to her now, though he didn't know what. Then she stepped forward. Close. Too close. The distance vanished until her shadow swallowed him whole. Her hand rose, slow and deliberate, until her fingers curled around his wrist. Her touch was firm, steady. His pulse thundered beneath her grip, but he didn't pull away. She leaned in, her face inches from his. Her breath brushed against his cheek, warm and steady. The glow in her eyes, deepened, sharp yet unreadable. For a heartbeat the world stopped. Then she whispered again. "Don't stop." The words were the same, but this time they carried more. They weren't about armor. They weren't about repairs. They weren't even about orders. They were about something unspoken, something dangerous, something that tied them together. Now. The mechanic's chest tightened. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the words died in his throat. He already knew. Deep down, he knew. Her eyes lingered on his, glowing faintly in the dim light. For the first time, he thought he saw more than command, more than strength. He saw need, he saw trust. He saw a bond that should not exist, but now did. And then, she released his wrist. The warmth of her hand vanished, leaving only the memory. She stepped back slowly, her gaze still locked on his. With a final look, sharp, haunting, unforgettable, she turned and walked away, her armor gleaming as though it had never been broken. The human stood frozen, his heart still racing, his hands trembling. The room was silent once more, but the silence was not empty. It was alive. He knew this was not the end. Her words, her scar, her gaze, he would carry them forever. And as the door shut behind her, the echo of her whisper clung to the air, promising one thing. This was only the beginning. The whisper. The human's pulse hammered in his ears as her words echoed in his mind. "Go on, human, don't stop." Simple words, but they carried a weight that sank deep into him. He had repaired machines under fire, engines as ships burned, but never had his hands shaken like this. He tried to focus on the armor again. The metal was scorched, wires frayed and twisted. His tools clinked softly as he shifted them across the table, pretending to be calm. But her voice lingered, pressing against his thoughts. It was not only the command itself, it was the way she said it, too soft for a battlefield order. Too close, too personal. He risked another glance at her. She had not moved back. Her body loomed over him, silent and unyielding. The faint glow of her skin shimmered against the broken plating like fire hidden under glass. Her eyes followed his every twitch, her breathing steady, calm, almost rhythmic. His hand slipped again, and a small spark hissed upward, landing on his arm. He hissed softly at the sting, jerking his sleeve back. Before he could recover, her hand moved, fast, precise. She caught his wrist, her clawed fingers curling just enough to hold, not enough to hurt. The mechanic froze. Her touch was firm yet strangely careful. For a heartbeat, he forgot the tools, forgot the armor, forgot everything except the heat of her hand against his skin. Her face tilted slightly closer. He could see the fine lines of her skin now, not smooth like a human's, but patterned, almost, carved by light itself. She was both terrifying and beautiful in ways he could not understand. Then came the whisper. Closer than before. Softer. Right by his ear. Don't stop. The word slid through him, sinking into his chest. His breath caught. It was not just a command. It felt like a secret, spoken only for him. A sound meant to bind, not to order. He forced his gaze down, back to the armor, trying to hide the storm rising inside him. His hand steadied the tool, but every movement felt different now. He was no longer just repairing her armor. He was responding to her voice, to that whisper. Each spark that flew off the metal seemed to echo her words. He tightened a bolt, adjusted the inner plating, his fingers brushing the edge of her armor. Her breath stirred again, slow and deep, brushing the side of his face. He wanted to step away, to break free from the closeness, but at the same time, part of him didn't. The silence between them grew heavy once more, but now it was filled with something else. It was no longer just the silence of a warrior watching her mechanic. It was the silence of something unsaid, something dangerous. The human swallowed hard, his voice caught in his throat. He dared not speak. His orders were clear: repair, finish, leave. But her eyes told him leaving would not be so simple. The armor hissed as the heat faded, the repair nearly complete. Still he worked slowly, almost unwilling to end it. His hand brushed too close to her skin, and she did not flinch. Instead, her gaze softened for a flicker of a moment, so brief he thought he imagined it. When he dared to look again, her eyes had returned to steel, sharp and unyielding. But the whisper still lingered in his ear, alive and burning. He set down the tool slowly, his hands trembling. He had repaired what he could, but something told him the work was far from finished. And as he turned, her eyes locked on his once more. The silence stretched. Her lips parted as though she might speak again. But this time she said nothing. Instead, her gaze told him everything. This was no longer just about armor. It was about something hidden, something he was not meant to see. Yet she allowed it. The human understood then. Her whisper had changed everything, and the real danger was only beginning. The hidden scar. The human's hands were steady now, but his heart was not. Every movement felt heavier than before, as if her whisper still clung to his skin. He tried to keep his focus on the armor, tried to remind himself it was just metal, just a task. But his eyes betrayed him. As he adjusted one of the inner plates, his fingers brushed against the edge of the armor where the fracture had been deepest. The metal shifted slightly, revealing something hidden beneath. For a moment he froze. It was not more steel. It was not wires. It was her. Beneath the armor lay a scar, long, jagged, cutting across her chest. The flesh glowed faintly, lines of light running along the wound like cracks in glass. It was old, far older than the burn he had been sent to repair. This was not a mark of the recent battle. It was something from long before. The mechanic pulled his hand back quickly, almost dropping the tool. He should not have seen that, he was sure of it. His orders had been clear: repair the armor, nothing more. Do not touch what was not broken. Do not look where he was not allowed. But it was too late. He had seen, and she knew. The warrior's eyes narrowed. She did not move, but the silence between them grew sharp, cutting into him like a blade. His breath caught in his throat as he realized she was no longer just watching his work. She was watching him, measuring him. His mind raced. Should he apologize? Should he look away? But before he could decide, her hand moved again. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her palm against the table, leaning closer, her face inches from his. Her gaze flicked downward, toward the scar, toward his trembling hands, and then back to his eyes. The human swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of her stare pressing against him, asking a question without words. What will you do now that you've seen? His instinct screamed at him to step back, to turn away, to pretend he had noticed nothing. But something stronger held him in place. Curiosity. The scar was not just an injury. It was a story. A secret. He reached for the tool again, this time, slower, almost cautious, and adjusted the edge of the plate to cover it. His movements were gentle, respectful, as though hiding a treasure rather than sealing a wound. He expected her to stop him, to push his hand away, to end this fragile moment. But she didn't. Instead, she let him. Her chest rose and fell with a slow breath. Her eyes softened for just a flicker of a second, the steel melting into something else. Vulnerability. He had not expected that. Not from her. The mechanic's heart pounded. This was no ordinary scar. He knew it. Whatever had caused it was not just a weapon or a battle. It was something far greater. Something that had nearly broken her. When he looked up again, their eyes locked. For the first time, he did not see only command in her stare. He saw pain. Pain hidden so deeply it almost seemed like it didn't exist until now. The silence stretched long, the hum of the broken machines the only sound. His hands rested on the armor, still covering the scar, still shaking slightly. He wanted to speak, to ask what had done this to her, to ask why she let him see what no one else had. But he said nothing, and she did not answer. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, almost like the echo of his own thoughts. You saw. The words were not angry. They were not cold. They were heavy. The human felt the weight of them sink into his chest. Yes, he had seen. And now he could never forget. Her eyes lingered on his face, searching, waiting for his reaction. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, she leaned, back again, the distance between them growing. But the scar, the memory of it, remained. The mechanic's hands tightened on his tools. The armor was almost complete. But he understood something now. This repair was not just about steel. It was about trust, and she had given him more than he had expected. He just didn't know if he was ready to carry it. The confession in silence. The mechanic's hands lingered on the final bolts, but his mind was no longer on the armor. It was on the scar. That glowing, wound beneath the plates, haunted him, replaying in his thoughts again and again. It was not just an injury. It was a story carved into her flesh, and she had let him see it. The workshop was heavy with silence. Sparks from his last weld still hissed faintly on the floor, fading into darkness. He tried to focus on the task, but every time he moved his hand, he felt her eyes on him, watching, waiting, testing. He thought she might speak again, but she didn't. Not a word left her lips. Instead, she simply stood there, close enough that he could feel the weight of her presence pressing against his shoulders. Her silence was more powerful than any voice. The human adjusted the final plate carefully, his fingers brushing against the warm edges of the metal. He tried not to think about what lay beneath, but the scar pulsed in his memory. What battle had caused it? What weapon could cut through her kind's legendary armor? And why did she not hide it from him? He stole a glance at her face. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, sharp but unreadable. Yet there was something softer hiding beneath that steel stare, like a shadow trying to break free. He set the tool down, his hands trembling. The repair was nearly finished, but the moment was not. He knew it, she knew it. The silence between them held more than words ever could. The alien warrior shifted slightly, her claws dragging lightly across the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Then she leaned closer once more. Their faces were near, almost too near. He expected her to speak, to order him away, to end the tension. But she did not. Instead, her eyes drifted down toward the repaired chest plate, toward the scar hidden beneath. For the first time, he saw something in her gaze that unsettled him more than command or power. He saw trust. Fragile, dangerous trust. The human's breath caught. His chest tightened as he realized the truth. She had allowed him to see her weakness. And in their world, weakness was never shown. Not to allies, not to enemies, certainly not to humans. The silent assignment. The workshop was silent except for the low hum of broken machines and the faint crackle of sparks. A single light hung from the ceiling, swaying gently, throwing long shadows across the metal walls. In the center of the room stood the human mechanic, his hands trembling slightly as he placed his tools on the bench. He had repaired many things before, ships, weapons, engines, but never this. Never her. Before him stood the alien warrior. Her armor was damaged from battle, the chest plate cracked open where energy fire had struck. The burn marks still glowed, faintly, as if the memory of the fight had not left the metal. She was taller than him, her presence heavy and commanding, with eyes that glimmered like twin blades in the dark. She said nothing, only watched as he prepared. The mechanic swallowed hard. He had been chosen, though he didn't know why. Many others were more skilled, but somehow the assignment had fallen to him. Repair her armor. Do not fail. That was the only instruction he had been given. He lifted the cracked plate and placed it carefully on the table. The metal was warm under his fingers, as if it carried the heat of her body still. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he felt as though the armor itself was alive, pulsing faintly in his hands. He forced his focus back. This was just a job, nothing more. Behind him, the warrior shifted her stance. The sound of her movements echoed sharply in the quiet room, and he felt her eyes burn into his back. He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. She stood there silent, her chest exposed where the armor had broken. The glow of her skin was strange, not human, but there was something fragile beneath the scars of battle. He reached for his tools, trying to calm his shaking hands. A small welder sparked to life, its flame flickering blue against the dim light. He lowered it toward the damaged armor, but even as he worked, he could not ignore the way she stood so close. Her shadow fell over him, heavy and sharp. The first strike of the welder sent sparks flying, scattering across the floor. He worked slowly, carefully, tracing the line of the fracture. The room filled with the smell of heated metal, thick and biting. He wanted to focus only on the repair, but he could feel her breathing behind him, steady and deep, every breath brushing against his skin like a weight. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and adjusted the plate. The alien warrior still had not spoken. The silence pressed down on him, heavier than the armor he was repairing. Finally, he dared to glance up at her. Her eyes did not move. They were fixed on his hands, watching every small motion, every spark, every tremble. He felt like prey under the gaze of a predator, yet there was no malice in her stare. Only intensity. Only something he could not name. His hand slipped slightly, the welder sparking louder than before. He froze, afraid he had ruined the work, but she did not flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, just slightly, and the distance between them shrank. He could feel the warmth of her presence now, almost touching, though still apart. He swallowed again, his throat dry. Why was she watching so closely? Why him? He adjusted the tool and continued, the metal hissing under the flame. The fracture began to close, the glow of the crack fading under his careful work. Still, the silence stretched. Every heartbeat echoed in his ears. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words would not come. He had been warned not to speak unless spoken to, and she had not spoken. At last he placed the welder down and ran, his hand gently over the repaired surface. The armor was stronger now, the fracture nearly invisible. Relief washed through him, though it was brief, because when he looked up, her face was closer than before. The warrior leaned forward, her eyes still locked on his. The air between them felt charged, alive, as though the very room held its breath. She did not blink. She did not move back. He could feel the words rising in his throat, but again he stopped himself. Silence. Always silence. Then, without warning, she placed her hand on the table beside his, the sound sharp against the steel. The mechanic froze. Her fingers were long, clawed slightly but steady, calm. She leaned even closer until her breath brushed against his ear, and though she still said nothing, the weight of her presence spoke louder than any words could. The human's heart pounded in his chest. The armor was not finished yet. The job was not complete. But he already knew this was not just an assignment. It was something else, something far more dangerous and far more important. In that moment, the mechanic understood one thing clearly. He was not repairing armor. He was stepping into a story he could not control, and the silence was only the beginning, the unexpected closeness. The room felt smaller now. The human mechanic tried to steady his hands as he reached for another tool, but his fingers shook more than before. He told himself it was just the heat of the welder, the smell of burnt metal, the silence pressing too hard on his nerves. But deep down, he knew it was not that. It was her. The alien warrior still stood close, her armor half open, her chest exposed where the plates had cracked. The faint glow of her skin lit the edges of the wound, pulsing softly as if alive. He had seen many soldiers in his life, covered in blood, scars, and metal, but none had ever leaned this close. None had ever studied him with such sharp attention. He cleared his throat softly, afraid the sound was too loud in the silence. His eyes avoided hers as he picked up a small clamp and began to adjust the inner frame of the armor. The metal creaked, stiff and heavy, resisting his efforts. He leaned in, both hands working carefully, sparks flashing as he cut away the ruined pieces. That was when he felt it, her movement. She leaned closer, bending down slightly until her presence surrounded him fully. Her shadow fell across his arms, her breath brushed the back of his neck, and for a moment he thought he would drop the tool. His chest tightened. He told himself to keep working, to ignore the closeness. But the nearness of her body was impossible to ignore. She was taller, stronger, more powerful in every way. Yet here she stood, silent, letting him touch the very armor that shielded her life. The clamp slipped, and he cursed under his breath. Sparks flew across the table, bouncing against his arm. He pulled back quickly, but before he could steady himself, her hand moved. One strong, clawed finger pressed lightly on the armor, holding it still. The touch was controlled, careful, but the sound of her claws against the steel echoed in the quiet workshop. His breath caught. Her hand was so close to his own that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. Not fire-hot, but warm, alive, strange in a way he could not explain. He froze, waiting, but she did not pull away. Instead, she leaned even closer, her head tilting down, her eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. The human swallowed hard. He wanted to step back, but his legs refused to move. Instead, he kept working, each movement slower than before. His heart pounding louder in his ears. Her gaze followed his every action, when he cut, when he welded, when he tightened a bolt. Her eyes did not leave his hands. It was not just watching. It was searching, like she was looking for something hidden in his touch. He risked a glance upward. Their eyes met. It was like looking into a storm. Her eyes were deep, sharp, and unreadable. Yet there was something else, something almost human, hidden beneath the steel of her stare. His throat tightened as he quickly looked away, returning to the repair before his courage broke. Then it happened. Her voice. Low, quiet, but clear. "Go on, human. Don't stop." The words cut through the silence like a blade. His hand froze, on the tool, his mind racing. Did she just... No, he must have imagined it. But when he looked up, her lips were still parted, her expression calm yet commanding. "Go on," she repeated, softer this time, but with a strange weight. The human's breath quickened. No one had warned him about this. No one had said she would speak, much less in that tone. It was not a command of war, not an order given to soldiers. It was different, gentler, but heavier. He forced his hand to move again, tracing the welder, carefully over the seam. Sparks danced against the shadows. His movement steadied, not because he was calmer, but because he feared stopping. She had told him not to. Her closeness became unbearable. The warmth of her skin, the sound of her breathing, the low hum in her chest as she stood behind him. It pulled at his senses, drowning out everything else. He had never been this close to someone like her before. When the last piece of metal slid into place, he stepped back, finally letting out a shaky breath. But before he could gather his thoughts, she leaned even closer, bending until her face was level with his. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the sparks. Her lips parted slightly, as though she might speak again, but she did not. Instead, she simply stayed there, close enough that he could feel her breath on his cheek. The silence stretched once more, heavy and unbroken. The human knew then. This was not just an assignment. It was something more dangerous, something deeper. And whatever it was, he was already caught inside it.